Good evening. This is Thomas Simpson again here with AfroSolo TV. I am very happy that you're here with us again this evening. And as usual, I have someone very, very special here. How are you doing, Doctor?
I'm doing wonderfully, Thomas, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me this evening.
Well, it is very nice to have you here on AfroSolo TV. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how you got involved with the arts.
I actually started out as a theater artist. I was a thespian here in San Francisco,
Wow.
and when I was about 16, with a group of friends, Janice Reed and Debbie Lowry, some other friends of mine from Polytechnic High School, we got together and we did a theater arts camp for children.
Wow.
And we made all the papers because here are these high school students putting on this theater camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved doing theater. It gave me a chance to express something inside of myself. And I wasn't conscious enough to understand that this was part of my inner being seeking expression. I was just doing something that was fun, that was interesting, that was enlivening, and it came naturally to me. So I went on to become a theater major at the University of Puget Sound, and at the same time, I was a pre-med biology/psychology major because I was hedging my bets.
Yes.
I thought, now if this whole theater thing doesn't work out, I need something
Yes.
that would earn a living. And I kept going back and forth. Am I going to do theater? Am I going to do psychology? And in the meantime, one of the great gifts that I got from my mother, Lizella Wade, was my mom really loved music. And she insisted that we all, and I have 5 sisters and a brother, that we all learn an instrument. Wow. So we all learned piano, and then we went on to learn another instrument. I learned flute, and then I went on when I was a student at UPS to study voice. And all of those things combined, and now I'm studying guitar,
Wow.
which is my new love, and I'm very, very terrible at it,
I'm
but
sure.
I enjoy it.
I'm sure you're just terrible.
I enjoy
Well, let me ask you this. Do you remember your first performance?
Oh my goodness. My mother recorded it, so I don't remember it, but I know what it was.
Wow.
My first performance was standing up at church
Yes.
and saying, "Christ is risen today."
My first performance was in church also.
Oh.
It was at a Christmas program for the church. And everyone else had a part, and then some of the sisters asked me, well, Tommy, which is what my family calls me, do you have a part? And I said, no. And it was sort of like, glory to God in the highest,
Oh,
peace
beautiful.
on earth.
Yes.
And that was my first performance
But
also.
isn't that where so many African American artists started? I think about the great singers,
Yes.
Aretha Franklin
Yes.
or Al Green,
Yes.
or some of the really great artists started in church.
That's right.
Because that was our stage.
Yes.
And it was certainly our pulpit and the place where the community came together.
Now, you mentioned Aretha Franklin.
Oh, yes.
Who are some of your idols, or who were your idols at the time, or who do you
I
think
would
of
have
that?
to say growing up, Aretha was toward the top of my list. I loved all the Motown greats and Aretha. You know, in terms of acting, it's funny, I was in theater, but I don't really remember who inspired me in theater. Maybe, I think in those days it was mostly people like Moms Mabley. Used to love Moms Mabley because my dad loved Moms Mabley.
Yes.
And he would call us, "Hey, Moms Mabley's on." We'd all run to the living room to see Moms Mabley
remember
doing her
Pigmeat?
thing. Mom, nothing
Yeah.
an old man can do for me, bring me a young man. Oh, God, I loved her. Now, Pigmeat,
Big Martha,
yes.
Here comes the
yes,
judge.
Yes, yes.
But as we talk about art and what it meant to our culture, I think some of those elements were transformative.
Yes.
And just sort of thinking about our people during slavery
Exactly.
and how the arts, although we probably didn't think about it at the time,
Right.
but just think of it like Wade in the Water.
Yes. All of those songs that gave expression, first of
Right.
all, to the feeling life.
Right.
And for me as a psychologist, see, the key piece, when I wrote the book Power Choices, the key piece of that book is that we are on a journey. The soul is on a journey. The journey has certain signposts. There's certain markers along the way. We investigate. Where am I? How am I feeling? What's happening in my life? Is my life where it needs to be for me to become the wisest, the most loving, the most whole, the most complete person that I can be? Or am I, where most of us are, locked in a battle with my ego because my ego wants to defeat me?
And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But first I want to see how you segued from the arts into clinical psychology
You know,
or the biology. What
it was
happened?
I can't say it was an informed choice, but it was an intuitive movement. I just kept going back and forth, and then the day just came that said, I have to choose something. And I chose to go down the path of psychology because I actually thought at the time I would make a bigger difference. Now, what I didn't know, of course, is that all those years in theater, all that practice being on stage was preparation for me to be a psychologist who's in the media. And I actually hosted my first television show here in San Francisco at KGO TV when I was 16.
Wow.
So that whole theater arts movement led to me being on TV, and I've been on TV ever since.
That's wonderful. Now, in terms of being a clinical psychologist, but also having your arts background,
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about how the two kind of melt together. Especially, again, we talked about it just a few seconds ago in terms of slavery and how, even though, as I said, they may not have thought about those songs as providing some means of resilience,
Yes.
how we've used arts as a way of getting into our souls to be resilient.
Yeah.
I think about the song Go Down Moses
Right.
and what that meant.
Exactly.
And of course, some of the spirituals having double meanings
Exactly.
around running away,
Follow the drinking gourd.
follow the drinking gourd.
Follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting for to carry you to freedom. And when the slaves heard that song, that meant the Underground Railroad was coming through, and be ready to go.
Can you imagine the courage
Yes.
that it took to leave? But also the ingenuity of
God.
the masses really not knowing.
Right.
At some point, you just come, how could they not know?
Yes.
But it was so well done that often they just didn't know what was happening.
And there was the myth. You see, there was the need to believe that the African people were happy under slavery. They were well cared for. And if you had a benign slave owner, then you had reason to be grateful. And I remember reading, it was just this week, I was reading an account of a former slave giving an interview, one of the few recorded. And the enslaved person, now freedman, said, when we stepped out into freedom, it was like a great burden being lifted off my shoulders.
Most definitely.
And people felt the weight of that, the grief of that, the oppression of it so deeply. You know, the second book I wrote, What Mama Couldn't Tell Us About Love, is about the emotional healing coming out of slavery. And one of the things that is so pronounced that we talk about over and over in the book is how much depression there was for the enslaved people. And then coming out of the enslaved experience, the hopefulness, the ideal life would get better, only to meet Jim Crow.
Reconstruction.
And
Jim Crow.
Reconstruction, all of those things. But Thomas, the thing that's most profound for me is that people understood that this was an evil, and there were 450 armed insurrections that were mounted by the African people. Now, those are the ones that are recorded.
Yes.
Think how many are not recorded that we will never know.
Right.
How many people took up arms or ran away
Now those
or defeated?
silent rebellions.
Yeah, spitting in the water.
Yes. And how the arts, I'm going to take it back to the arts
Right.
in terms of AfroSolo.
Yes.
And also in terms of how the arts have sustained us.
Yes.
I think the music, the spirituals, the gospels, then jazz.
Exactly.
I think about
Dancing.
Of course,
Because
dance,
all
theater,
of this
music.
came with us
Right.
on the ships. It came from the motherland.
Mm-hmm.
There's a rich tradition that came with us. And even though the very deliberate, systematic attempts were made to stamp out the music, no drumming, because people figured out, oh, wait a minute,
Communicate.
they're communicating.
Yes.
Wait, they're singing, they're communicating.
Yes.
They're dancing, wait a minute, they're communicating.
Yes.
Because the attempt to break the spirit was done along these artistic lines, and in spite of it, one of the things that I thought was so clever is that the enslaved Africans took these songs, Christian
Yeah.
gospel songs, and turn them into freedom songs.